The first thing Miss Adele said when I got back from visiting my sister in Memphis was, "Verdell, who was that stager you hired? The one with the van full of beige pillows." I was standing on my porch, my overnight bag still in my hand, the humid St. Louis air clinging to my skin like a second thought. My back ached from the drive. I just wanted to get inside, put on the kettle, and let the quiet of my own house settle back into my bones. Miss Adele was leaning over the wrought iron fence that separated our properties, her garden gloves covered in the rich, dark soil she was so proud of. She'd lived next door to me for 40 years. She knew the rhythm of my life better than anyone, knew I didn't hire people to do things I could do myself, and I certainly didn't hire people to bring beige pillows into a house already full of color and memory. "Stager?" I asked. The word felt foreign on my tongue. "I didn't hire a stager, Adele." Her brow furrowed, a roadmap of concern etched into her forehead. "Well, that's funny. A woman was here last Tuesday with a clipboard taking pictures of your parlor from the sidewalk. Said she was preparing the house for market. I thought maybe you were finally thinking of selling, moving down to Memphis to be with Charlotte for good." Something cold trickled down my spine, a sensation entirely separate from the summer heat. My house. For market. I looked past her, at the familiar brick facade of my home, the place I had brought my son, Andre, home from the hospital, the place my husband, Robert, had passed in, right in his favorite armchair. The thought of it being on the market was like imagining my own skin being sold to a stranger. "No," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I'm not selling." I managed a weak smile for her, a small reassurance that felt like a lie even though it was the truest thing I knew. I promised to call her later, then turned toward my front door. The house stood silent, watching me. It looked the same as it always had, the same heavy oak door, the same brass kick plate I polished every other Saturday. But Adele's words had changed the air around it, draping it in a sense of unease. Inside my purse, my fingers found the familiar weight of my keys. I had been a locksmith for 31 years, rekeying commercial buildings all over the city. I knew the feel of metal, the language of pins and cylinders. My hands remembered every lock I'd ever worked on. The key to my own front door was a Schlage, worn smooth along the edges from a lifetime of use. I slid it into the lock. It went in halfway, then stopped. I pulled it out, checked to make sure it wasn't bent, though I knew it wasn't. I tried again. It met the same solid, unyielding resistance. It was the wrong key. Except it wasn't. It was the only key. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. My key, which had opened this door for more than 4 decades, no longer fit. The lock had been changed. For a moment I just stood there on my own porch, a trespasser at my own front door. The hum of the cicadas in the old maple tree sounded unnaturally loud. My son, Andre, and his wife Janelle had been living with me for 2 years, ever since their finances took a bad turn. They'd lost their house, a flipped duplex that had turned out to be a money pit. I had told them to stay as long as they needed, to get back on their feet. Janelle was a real estate agent. She understood the market's cruelties, or so I thought. Apparently, ambition works both ways. They had their own key. They were supposed to be watching the house while I was in Memphis. I pictured Janelle's face, always smiling, always a little too brightly. The way she called me Mom Sutton, but never looked me directly in the eye. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of Miss Adele's roses. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I walked down the porch steps, my bag bumping against my leg, and went around the side of the house, my sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The back of the house was more private, shielded by a tall privet hedge. There were 2 doors, the main kitchen door and a small service door that led to the mudroom. In 2009, after a few break-ins in the neighborhood, I'd installed a special deadbolt on that mudroom door myself. It wasn't a standard brand. It was a Medico, high security, with a key that couldn't be duplicated at a hardware store. It was my private entry, my own small piece of professional paranoia. I doubted Janelle even knew it was there, or if she did, she wouldn't have a key for it. No one did but me and my sister Charlotte. My hand trembled slightly as I found the key on my ring. It was smaller, more complex than the Schlage. It slid into the keyway with a smooth, satisfying precision. I turned it. The bolt retracted with a clean, solid click. The sound was both a relief and a confirmation. I pushed the door open. The air inside was cool and still. Nothing looked out of place in the mudroom. My garden clogs were by the door, a fine layer of dust on them. But the stillness felt wrong. It wasn't the comfortable silence of an empty house. It was the sterile quiet of a place that had been deliberately emptied. I walked into the kitchen. The big farmhouse table was clear, wiped clean. The cookie jar where I kept my loose change was gone. On the refrigerator, the crayon drawing my grandson, little Andre Jr., had made for me was missing. My heart clenched. I moved through the dining room and into the parlor, and I understood. The room was not my own. My armchair, the one Robert had loved, was gone. In its place was a sleek gray sofa I had never seen before. My family photos, the ones that covered the mantelpiece, had been replaced by a single generic print of a dandelion. The curtains my mother had helped me sew were gone, replaced by thin white panels that let in a sterile, shadowless light. The house had been staged. Miss Adele was right. My home, my life, had been edited, erased, and the only people with the access and the audacity to do it were living under my roof. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down on the strange, cold sofa. It felt like sitting in a stranger's house, a house that wore the ghost of my own. I thought of Janelle, of her talk about curb appeal and depersonalizing a space for buyers. I had thought she was just talking about her work. I had never imagined my own life would become one of her listings. The silence of the house pressed in on me. I didn't know where my son was, or his wife, or my grandson. Their bedrooms upstairs were empty, their things gone. It was a clean, methodical removal. This wasn't a robbery. It was an eviction. My own eviction, carried out in my absence. I thought about the new lock on the front door, a silent declaration that I was no longer welcome. But they had overlooked one thing, one small detail, a locksmith's private deadbolt. And suddenly I understood something. They believed I was locked out. They believed I was gone. They were operating under the assumption that I had no way back in, that their story, whatever story they were telling, was the only one. But I was inside. I was sitting in the heart of their deception, and they had no idea. The cold knot in my stomach didn't go away, but something else settled alongside it, a quiet, patient resolve. I had spent my life understanding how locks worked. Now, it seemed, I would have to apply that same meticulous attention to my own family. The next morning, the sun streamed through the unfamiliar white curtains, casting long, empty rectangles of light across the floor. I hadn't slept. I had spent the night in my own bed, which thankfully they had left, surrounded by the ghosts of my own possessions. The house felt hollow, its soul scooped out. My first call was not to my son. I knew that conversation would be a dead end, a maze of excuses and deflections. My first call was to Mr. Calloway. Arthur Calloway had been handling the legal work for my commercial accounts for the better part of 20 years. He was a man who appreciated precision. He was retired now, mostly, but he still took calls from old clients. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and steady as I remembered. "Verdell Ashford," he said, a note of warmth in his formal tone. "It's been a while. I trust you're keeping well." "I'm well, Arthur. Thank you for asking," I began, my own voice tight. I took a breath. "I need some advice. Something has happened at my house." I told him everything, starting with Miss Adele's question about the stager and ending with the key that no longer fit my own front door. I described the staged parlor, the missing family photos, the calculated emptiness of the rooms. I spoke quietly, laying out the facts as if I were describing a faulty cylinder, keeping the tremor of betrayal out of my voice. He listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in his office. "They changed the locks," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. "The front door and the main back door, not the mudroom door. I installed that one myself years ago. They didn't know about it, or they couldn't find a locksmith to replace it." "A medico, if I recall?" he asked. I was surprised he remembered. "Yes, from the old First National Bank job." "Good hardware," he murmured. "So you're in the house now?" "I am." "And you haven't spoken to your son or his wife?" "No," I said. "I wanted to understand what I'm facing before I did that." "Wise," he said. "Verdell, what your daughter-in-law is likely attempting is a form of illegal eviction, but given her profession, she might be trying to wrap it in a thin veil of legality. Staging the house suggests she intends to sell it. To do that, she needs to establish a right to sell." My throat felt dry. "But it's my house. The deed is in my name. Robert and I paid it off 17 years ago." "A deed is a powerful thing," Mr. Calloway said, "but it's not impregnable. People can file claims, affidavits, especially if they can create a narrative that the owner has abandoned the property. Your trips to see your sister in Memphis, how often do you go?" "Every few months. I stay for 2 or 3 weeks at a time since Charlotte's health took a turn." "And Janelle knew this?" "Of course. She always said, 'Have a wonderful time, Mom Sutton. Don't you worry about a thing here.'" The memory of her voice, so full of false sincerity, made my stomach clench. "Verdell, I need you to do something for me," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more focused. "I need you to go down to the St. Louis County Clerk's office. Today, go to the Recorder of Deeds. I want you to request a copy of all recent filings associated with your property address. Don't just check your name. Check your son's name, Andre Ashford, and your daughter-in-law's, Janelle Ashford. See if anything has been filed in the last month." "What sort of filing?" I asked. "It could be a few things, but I have a suspicion. I'm looking for something called an affidavit of adverse possession, or something similar. It's a bold move, almost reckless, but if she's desperate, she might try it. It's a document where someone claims they have taken possession of a property openly and exclusively for a period of time." Adverse possession. The term was vaguely familiar from my commercial work, something that came up with disputed property lines or abandoned lots. To think of it being used against me, for my own home, felt like a violation. "She's only lived here 2 years," I said, "and it was with my permission." "The law has specific timelines, usually much longer," he agreed. "But filing the document is the first step. It creates a cloud on the title. It's a tactic. She might be hoping you won't notice, or that you'll be too intimidated to fight it. If she filed it, it's a public record. Get a copy. Get it certified, and call me the moment you have it in your hand." "All right, Arthur," I said. My hand was steady now. I had a task, a direction. It was better than sitting in the empty silence. "And Verdell," he added just before we hung up, "don't change the locks back. Not yet. Let them think you're still on the outside. The fact that you got in, that you are there right now, is our advantage. Let them continue to operate on a false assumption. It's where people make their biggest mistakes." The county clerk's office was a place of hushed efficiency, smelling of old paper and floor wax. The air was cool, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity outside. I filled out the request form with my property address, my hands moving with a deliberate calm I did not feel. I listed my name, then Andre's, then Janelle's. I slid the form under the plexiglass barrier to a woman who did not look up from her computer screen. She typed for a few minutes, the clicking of her keyboard the only sound in the cavernous room. I watched the side of her face, waiting. My own reflection in the plexiglass was a pale, determined ghost. "There's a recent filing under Janelle Ashford for that parcel number," the clerk said, her voice monotone. "An affidavit of adverse possession, filed 12 days ago." 12 days. I had been in Memphis. She had waited until I was gone. The coldness spread from my stomach up into my chest. It was real. Mr. Calloway had been right. "I'd like a certified copy, please," I said. My voice was level, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. The clerk nodded, printed the document, and stamped it with a heavy, satisfying thud. As she handed it to me, I read the first few lines. Janelle's full name was there, typed neatly. She claimed open, notorious, and exclusive occupancy of the property. She claimed I had willingly vacated the premises and relinquished my interest. Willingly vacated, relinquished. The legal language was a cold, brutal weapon. It sought to erase me from my own story, to turn my visit to my sick sister into an act of abandonment. My grief for my family, as I had known it, was a sharp physical pain. Grief makes people very easy to persuade, and Janelle had been counting on that. I paid the fee, my hands moving automatically. I folded the document carefully and placed it in my purse. As I walked out of the building and into the blinding sunlight, the city sounds seemed distant and muffled. I had the proof, the first piece of a puzzle I did not want to solve. My next step was clear. I needed to find the locksmith. A professional who changes the locks on a home has to believe they have the legal right to do so. They have to be told a story, and I wanted to know what story Janelle had told. Finding the locksmith was easier than I expected. The new lock on my front door was a Kwikset Smart Key. It was a popular residential brand, but the specific finish and model were ones I knew were favored by a handful of mobile locksmith services in the city that catered to real estate agents. They were quick, relatively inexpensive, and could be rekeyed easily between showings. I made 3 calls. On the third call, to a company called A1 Secure, the dispatcher confirmed they had done a job on my street 2 weeks ago. He gave me the name of the technician, Trey. I found Trey eating lunch in his van, parked on a quiet side street downtown. He was young, no older than 30, with hands that were already calloused from his trade. I tapped on his window and he rolled it down, a look of mild annoyance on his face that softened when he saw me. I didn't start with an accusation. I started with respect. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you Trey with A1 Secure?" He nodded, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. "Yeah. Can I help you?" "My name is Verdell Ashford. I was a commercial locksmith for 31 years, mostly with the big downtown firms." His interest was piqued. He sat up a little straighter. "Oh yeah? Which ones?" We talked shop for a few minutes. We spoke about pin tumblers and master keying systems, about the transition from metal to electronic locks. I could see him relax. In our shared, specific language, I was no longer a stranger. I was a colleague. "The reason I'm here," I said, my tone shifting slightly, "is that you did a rekey job at my house a couple of weeks ago, on Lafayette in Soulard." He frowned, trying to place it. "An older brick house. A real estate agent called it in? Janelle?" "That's the one," I said quietly. "She's my daughter-in-law." Trey's eyes widened slightly. He put his sandwich down. He was starting to understand that this was not a simple service call. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm just trying to understand the situation, Trey," I continued, keeping my voice calm and even. "When a client asks you to rekey a property, what do they need to provide you with?" "Proof of ownership or residency," he said immediately. "A deed, a utility bill, a driver's license with the address. It's company policy. It's the law." "And what did she provide?" He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "She's a real estate agent. We do a lot of work for her. She had a listing agreement and a signed letter." "A letter?" "Yeah, a letter from the owner. From you, I guess. Saying that you had moved out and that you were giving her full authority to manage the property, including securing it." The air in my car suddenly felt thin. A forged letter. Of course. It was so simple, so brazen. A piece of paper with my name signed at the bottom. A lie built on a foundation of trust. "She said you'd moved down to Memphis permanently," Trey went on, his voice low. She said you were getting on in years and couldn't manage the house anymore, and that the family had decided it was best to sell it to cover your care. She seemed really broken up about it, said it was a tough decision. I closed my eyes for a moment. The completeness of the narrative was breathtaking. She had built an entire world of fiction around me, painting me as feeble and forgetful, a woman who needed to be cared for, whose own home needed to be taken from her for her own good. She had used my age, my love for my sister, my own private life as weapons against me. "Trey," I said, opening my eyes, "I have never written such a letter. I have never had a conversation about selling my home. I was in Memphis visiting my sister, as I often do. I came home 2 days ago to find myself locked out." The color drained from his face. He looked from me to his own hands on the steering wheel, as if seeing for the first time the tool they had been. "Oh, man," he whispered. "She played me. She totally played me." "She played both of us," I said gently. "You were doing your job. You followed your company's policy. She gave you fraudulent documents." He looked genuinely distressed. "We can get in serious trouble for this. I can lose my license." "I don't want you to get in trouble," I said. "I just want the truth. Would you be willing to write down what you just told me? A simple statement, that Janelle Ashford hired you, what she told you about me, and what documents she showed you, that's all." He hesitated for only a second. "Yeah," he said, his voice firming with anger at being deceived. "Yeah, absolutely. Let me get a pad." I waited in my car while he wrote it out on a piece of paper from his invoice book. He signed it and dated it. When he handed it to me through the window, his hand was shaking. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Ashford," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I should have been more careful. Something felt a little off. But she was a regular client." "I understand," I said, and I truly did. Deception works best when it wears a familiar face. I drove home with Trey's signed statement in my purse, tucked next to the certified affidavit. The pieces were slotting into place. The picture they were forming was ugly and sad, but it was clear. I had the official filing. I had the testimony of the man she had hired to lock me out. I was no longer just a victim of a cruel family drama. I was building a case. As I pulled up to my house, the late afternoon sun glinted off the windows. It still looked like a stranger's house from the outside, but now I felt my ownership of it returning, not as a memory, but as a fight, and it was a fight I intended to win. That evening, the house was unnervingly quiet. I walked through the staged rooms, my footsteps echoing on the bare wood floors where my rugs used to be. Every empty space was a testament to Janelle's ambition. I ran my hand along the cold, unfamiliar mantelpiece. This was more than just about a house. It was about erasure. Janelle wasn't just trying to sell a piece of property. She was trying to sell my life out from under me, to narrate me into oblivion. I thought of Andre, my son. He had to have known. The logistics of it. Moving the furniture, packing my personal belongings, coordinating with the stager, it was too much for one person. He had watched it happen. He had let it happen. The pain of that thought was a physical weight in my chest, heavier than the loss of the house itself. A home is just bricks and mortar, but the trust of your own child, that is the foundation. And mine had crumbled. I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out before me like a tarot reading of my own misfortune. The affidavit, Trey's statement. I called Mr. Calloway and told him what I had learned from the locksmith. "A forged letter," he said, his voice grim. "That elevates this. It's fraud, Verdell. Pure and simple. We have a very strong position." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait for her to make the next move. She's filed the affidavit. She's staged the house. The next logical step is to list it for sale. She'll have to hire a listing agent. She'll put a sign in the yard. She'll schedule an open house. She believes you are in Memphis, locked out and unaware. We are going to let her walk right into the trap she built for herself." "You want me to just stay here? Quietly?" Exactly, he said. Be a ghost in your own home. Don't turn on lights that are visible from the street at night. Park your car a block away. Let Miss Adele next door know what's happening. We may need her as a witness, but ask for her discretion. The element of surprise is our greatest asset. Janelle's entire plan is predicated on your absence. Your presence is what will unravel it all. It was the hardest thing he could have asked of me. To live like an intruder in my own life, to hide behind my own curtains while the fiction of my departure was being prepared for public consumption. But I trusted Arthur. His brand of patience was strategic, a weapon in itself. The next few days were a strange, suspended limbo. I moved quietly through the house, the silence amplifying every creak of the floorboards. I ate canned soup, not wanting to cook and create familiar, welcoming smells that might drift out a window. I spent hours in my bedroom, looking out through the lace curtains at the street, at my neighbors walking their dogs, at the rhythm of the life that was supposed to be mine. On Thursday, a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A woman in a sharp blazer got out and planted a "for sale" sign in my front yard. It had a different realty company's name on it, not the one Janelle worked for. A professional courtesy, I supposed, a way to create distance. The sign felt like a headstone. My own name wasn't on it. It just said, "Coming soon." The phone rang that afternoon, my own landline. I almost didn't answer it, my heart leaping into my throat, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I picked it up, my hand covering the receiver to muffle my breathing. It was a voicemail service. I hadn't even known the phone was on. After the beep, a bright professional voice filled the silence. "Hi, Janelle, it's Brenda from Gateway Realty. Just calling to confirm. The photographer got some great shots. The listing is live on the MLS as of this morning. It looks fantastic. You were right, the staging makes all the difference. You said we can show it Saturday at the open house from 1 to 3, correct? Let me know. Talk soon." Saturday. 2 days away. And suddenly, I understood. The open house was the stage. That was where it would all come to a head. Janelle and her agent would be there, ready to present my home to the world, built on a scaffold of lies. They would be expecting an empty, polished stage. They would not be expecting the main character to be there, waiting in the wings. I called Mr. Calloway. "It's Saturday," I said, 1 o'clock. "I'll be there at 12:30, he replied, his voice calm. "Just stay put, Verdell, and let me do the talking at first." Saturday morning dawned bright and hot. From my upstairs window, I watched the neighborhood wake up. I saw Miss Adele watering her petunias and gave her a small, discreet wave. She nodded back, her expression one of solid, unwavering support. At noon, a car pulled up, and the listing agent, Brenda, got out. She was carrying a stack of glossy flyers and a tray of cookies from a local bakery. She used a key from a lockbox on the front doorknob to let herself in. I heard her moving around downstairs, opening windows, turning on lights. The smell of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies, a scent meant to evoke a feeling of home, drifted up the stairs. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I stayed in my bedroom, the door closed, listening. My heart was a steady, resolute drum. I was not afraid. I was simply waiting for the curtain to rise. At 12:30, exactly as he promised, I saw Mr. Calloway's car pull up. He was dressed in a simple suit carrying a leather briefcase. He walked up the path and I went down to meet him at the mudroom door, letting him in quietly. Brenda was in the parlor and didn't hear us. "Verdell," he said, his eyes kind. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "It's time." We walked together from the kitchen into the parlor. Brenda turned, a bright plastic smile on her face, assuming we were the first potential buyers. "Welcome," she chirped. "Welcome to this beautiful Soulard home. Feel free to look around. We have some information sheets on the coffee table." Mr. Calloway smiled politely. "Thank you. We'll do that. We're just going to wait here for a moment, if you don't mind. We're expecting the person who claims to be the seller." Brenda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The word "claims" had registered, but she recovered quickly, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Of course," she said, and bustled off toward the dining room. I stood by the window looking out at the street I knew so well. I watched as a familiar car turned the corner. Janelle's car. Andre was in the passenger seat. My breath hitched. He was here. He was with her. They parked across the street. Janelle got out, looking radiant in a cream-colored dress. She smoothed it down, her expression confident, proprietary. Andre got out after her. He did not look confident. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped. He glanced at the house, his own childhood home, and his eyes were full of a sadness so profound it reached me even through the window pane. He knew. He knew what this was, and he was letting it happen. They crossed the street and walked up the path. Janelle's heels clicked on the stone. She was smiling, ready to play the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, forced by circumstance to sell her dear mother-in-law's home. The front door opened. "Brenda?" Janelle called out, her voice bright. "Are you here?" "We're here!" She stepped into the foyer, Andre a half step behind her, and then she saw me. She froze. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. It was as if she had seen a ghost. In her narrative, I was hundreds of miles away. I was a problem that had been solved, a detail that had been handled. My physical presence here, in this room, was an impossibility. What are you doing here?" she stammered. Her voice was a thin, reedy thing. "This is my home, Janelle," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the space between us. Andre wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, at the toes of his shoes, as if they held the answers to the universe. Janelle's composure, the brittle armor of the real estate agent, began to reassert itself. Color flooded back into her face. "You abandoned this place," she said, her voice gaining a hard edge. "You left. I have the paperwork. I have proof. It's a legal process." "I was visiting my sister," I said calmly, "as I do every year, as you well know." The listing agent, Brenda, had appeared in the doorway of the dining room, her face a mask of confusion. She was looking back and forth between us, the tray of cookies still in her hand. "Janelle, what is going on?" she asked. Janelle ignored her. She took a step forward. "It doesn't matter. You were gone. The house was empty. I'm the sole occupant. I have filed for possession. You can talk to my lawyer." This was her script, the one she had rehearsed, but she hadn't rehearsed it with me in the room. Mr. Calloway stepped forward from the corner where he had been standing quietly. "I believe you'll want to talk to my lawyer," he said, his voice mild but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Arthur Calloway. I represent the legal owner of this property, Mrs. Verdell Ashford." He opened his briefcase and took out a file. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a single accusation. He simply began to lay out the facts. "This," he said, placing a document on the staged coffee table, "is the deed to this house, free and clear, in the name of Verdell and Robert Ashford. Robert is deceased, leaving Verdell as the sole owner." He placed another paper beside it. "This is a receipt from 2009 for the installation of a Medico high-security deadbolt on the mudroom door, installed by Mrs. Ashford herself, demonstrating her ongoing maintenance and concern for the property's security." Janelle's eyes were wide now. The confidence was draining out of her like sand from a broken hourglass. "And this," Mr. Calloway said, his voice dropping slightly, "is a signed and dated statement from a Mr. Trey Baldwin, a locksmith with A1 Secure. In it, he testifies that you hired him to change the locks on this property. He states that you informed him that the owner, Mrs. Ashford, had moved to Memphis permanently and relinquished control of the property. He further states that you provided him with a fraudulent letter, purportedly from Mrs. Ashford, authorizing your actions." He looked directly at Janelle. "Forgery, Miss Ashford, is a felony." Silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that had measured out the hours of my life for 40 years. Janelle stared at the papers on the table. Her face had gone pale, her carefully constructed reality dismantled piece by piece in under a minute. She looked at Andre, a desperate, pleading look, but Andre still wouldn't look up. He had retreated into a silence so deep it was a wall. The listing agent, Brenda, set the cookie tray down with a clatter. "I'm out," she said, her voice sharp with professional panic. "I want no part of this. The listing is pulled, as of right now. Janelle, my brokerage will be in touch." She turned and walked out the front door, leaving it open behind her. Janelle finally looked at me. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only the cold, hard fury of being caught, of being outmaneuvered. "You were never going to help us," she whispered, the words laced with venom. "Letting us live here, holding it over our heads. We needed this. We needed a new start." "A new start built on my ruin?" I asked. The question hung in the air. She had no answer. She turned and walked out, her shoulders stiff. A moment later, I heard her car door slam, and then it was just me and Andre, standing in the staged parlor of our broken family. He finally lifted his head. His eyes, the same eyes I had looked into when he was a baby, were filled with a shame so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. "Mama," he said, his voice cracking. He couldn't finish. There were no words for what he had done, or for what he had allowed to be done. He had stood by while his wife tried to steal my home, my security, my life. He had chosen her ambition over his mother's well-being. I just looked at him. I didn't need to say a word. My silence was its own verdict. He turned and walked out the door, following his wife. He didn't look back. Mr. Calloway came and stood beside me. "It's over, Verdell," he said softly. I nodded, still looking out the open door. It was over, but the cost was immense. I had my house back, but I had lost my son. In the days that followed, the legal machinery moved with quiet efficiency. Mr. Calloway filed a complaint with the State Real Estate Board. Janelle's brokerage license was placed under review. Her lawyer sent a letter formally withdrawing the adverse possession affidavit. There was no apology. There was only the silent, legal retreat. The staging company came and removed the strange, cold furniture. As they carried the gray sofa out the door, I felt a chapter of my life closing. The house was empty now, emptier than it had been even when it was staged. It was hollowed out by betrayal. The first thing I did was call a charity to come and pick up every piece of furniture from my son's and daughter-in-law's bedroom. I could not stand the thought of sleeping under the same roof as their ghosts. Then I went down to my workshop in the basement. I pulled out my old toolkit. The familiar weight of the tools in my hands was a comfort. The smell of metal and oil was the smell of my own competence, my own history. I started with the front door. I carefully disassembled the quick-set lock Janelle had installed. I took it apart piece by piece, laying the pins and springs out on a soft cloth. Then I replaced it. I installed a new Schlage deadbolt, a heavy commercial-grade lock that felt solid and true. I spent the rest of the day rekeying every door in the house, the main back door, the side door, even the locks on the interior doors. Each turn of the screwdriver, each click of a new pin dropping into place was an act of reclamation. I was not just changing locks, I was re-establishing the boundaries of my life. I was making my home my own again, with my own hands. When I was finished, I held the new set of keys in my palm. They were shiny and sharp, all keyed to a single new pattern that existed only in my mind and in the cylinders of my locks. There were only 2 copies, one for me and one that I would mail to my sister Charlotte. That evening, I sat in my parlor. My old armchair wasn't back yet. It was in storage with the rest of my things, but the room was mine again. The setting sun cast a warm, golden light through the windows. I put a Donny Hathaway record on the turntable, and the familiar sound of his voice filled the quiet house. The phone did not ring. Andre did not call. A part of me knew he never would. There are some betrayals that are too deep for words to mend. You can rebuild a house, you can change the locks, but you cannot unbreak a family. I looked around the room at the empty spaces on the walls where my photos used to hang. I would put them back up in time. For now, it was enough to be here, in the quiet, in the safety of my own home. A home secured not by anger or revenge, but by a locksmith's quiet knowledge and the simple, undeniable truth of a key that still worked. The peace I felt was not triumphant. It was a quiet, bittersweet thing, earned and costly and entirely my own.